And today I am joined by my friend Jessie, and we are going to be continuing our video series that we're kind of calling Behind BookTube, where we go a little bit more in depth talking about the behind the scenes sort of things that transpire, our feelings on things, giving some insight, but then also our thoughts on viewers of BookTube as well, because the both of us enjoy BookTube as a whole. And we've done a few videos now more so tied to the idea of BookTube as a job versus a hobby, the money side of things, book boxes. And for today, we're talking about reviewing in general. How much is BookTube even about books, and how much is it about book reviews and those sorts of things? But before we get into any individual prompts, just kind of an overall, just to make it as clear as possible that when we talk about book reviews, what we mean, because there are a lot of different styles of videos that people can consider reviews. There's rant reviews, there's wrap ups. Some people consider those a bunch of mini reviews. So, Jessie, what do you consider a review when we're not, besides just literal, like, this is a review of this book?
I mean, yeah, besides like the standalone review videos, I would count wrap-ups and that sort of thing as reviews because I've been doing that on my channel where I'm doing like a recent reads wrap-up and doing mini reviews for the last several books. And a big reason is because a lot of times with some books that you read, you just don't have a ton to say to take up a
Yeah.
full length video. So sometimes it's more conducive to just give shorter form reviews in more of a wrap up style. So I think I count those as reviews as well. So it's not just the standalone review videos, it's also any sort of wrap up style video.
And I think a lot of people end up eventually doing recent reads, either because they don't feel they've read enough in a single month to do a wrap up. So they wait until they have enough books, or they actually have the opposite where they read so many that they figure, I'm not going to be able to say anything of value about this book if I wait until my wrap up, because maybe one month you read, like 15 books or something. And
Right.
so you feel like in order to give a book the time it deserves, it'd be better to break it up into smaller chunks. And I know some people who read a lot of different genres will do wrap ups for the different genres as well, because they
Okay,
feel
yeah.
like it's better to do it that way.
Yeah.
I know for me, I like doing new releases wrap ups and sticking to
Mhm.
3 books per those, because I feel like it's enough time to give people a good idea of what the book's about and what I thought of it. And if I go too many more than that, then I feel like I don't get to give any actual thoughts. And then fewer, and it feels like I might as well just do an individual book review if I'm just doing
Right.
2.
Yeah.
So it depends. But just for the sake of clarity, as we go through the rest of this video, when we say review, we might be kind of referencing those sorts of videos as well. But starting with the first question and sort of the title of this video, how much overall do you feel BookTube is about books?
I would say the majority of BookTube is about books. And I think another thing that you can say it's about is about reading in general as a hobby. And I think that it kind of goes hand in hand because, of course, you have the channels that focus a lot more on the reviews, and you also have the channels that focus more on lifestyle around reading. Reading as a hobby, reading as a profession if you're a full-time booktuber. So I think I would say the majority of it is about books, and if it's not focused so much on the reviews, it's still about reading in
Yeah.
general.
And I
I feel
think
like you
another
kind of
side,
have to be. Yeah.
what?
I feel like you kind of have to be about one of those two things to even be considered like a booktuber.
Yeah.
But maybe there's exceptions to that.
Well, there kind of are, because I think sometimes
Yeah.
what'll happen is there are people that have really big channels, and I just want to be I don't want to seem like I'm saying these aren't real booktubers or anything like that, but there
Yeah.
are some people that have really big channels that are nothing about books, and then they start getting back into reading, or they want to share a love of reading that they already have, so they decide to do a separate channel, and because their original channels were already so big, then they end up having a really big following, and then they're what people think of when they think of booktube,
Yeah.
because that's their association with it. And sometimes those are more so the vloggers or
Yeah.
more pop culture type of things, or the kinds of videos where it's you were touching on this a little bit, lifestyle type of content.
Yeah.
So home hacks and things like that, which is really cool because it just shows how much books can be and should be for everyone. So I like that. I like that BookTube can be a little bit more than just reviews. I do think that in my own head, the idea of BookTube not really being solely about books makes it feel as though I'm not a real booktuber. I'm not really doing my due diligence when it comes to reviewing books, discussing books. But besides just reading and the everything that goes along with that, I'd say another aspect of it is publishing and trends and what leads to
Yeah.
certain books becoming prevalent. I like those kinds of conversations. I think that they're interesting because a lot of us, I think reading is so isolating and you start to notice things like, are vampires coming back? What's going on? And then it's kind of fun when you see people discuss that and you're like, yes, thank you. Or if you just feel like whatever the fill in the blank,
Yes.
whatever thing you've been noticing, it's kind of nice to have that discussion, I think.
Yeah.
But I also think that there are people who their entire channels are kind of dedicated to a specific series and they just do deep dives and they
Yeah.
go through different characters. And so at some point it's about the book, but it's almost like the culture around the book and the fandom. But
Yeah.
that falls into it too, I think.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so sticking back to reviews though, how often would you say you do book reviews? How often is it the other style of content and how often is it reviews?
Um, Golly, I would say at least a quarter of my videos are reviewing books, and I think it was more previously before I had 2 children under 2. Because now I don't have as much time to actually read the books. Um, so I would say, yeah, at least a quarter of my videos are reviewing books in wrap-up styles. I very seldom do full review videos. Big reason is because, again, I usually don't have a ton to say about the particular book. Um, so I don't feel it ever like warrants a review video. There are a couple of exceptions to that. Like the most recent one I had was the combat codes. I had enough to say about that one that I wanted to make a full review video for it. So I did. So yeah, I would say about a quarter of the videos I do. And if anyone's like, well, what is the other 3/4, Jesse? I would say book recommendations, which I think are different than reviews because it's
Yeah.
like I've already read this book, I've already reviewed it, and now I'm just recommending it to you based off of something that video is about, whether it's a trope that you like or an atmosphere that you like or whatever the case may be. So book recommendations, and then I will sometimes do the more vloggy, but I'm so bad at it.
I don't think you are. I think yours are so cozy.
Really?
Yeah. I don't ever know what to do because I'm just like, look at Luna. Isn't she cute? I'm like gesturing because she's over there. But that's because it's like, do you want to see my dog? Do you want to come with me to the bookstore? That's mainly what I do. That or, like play video games or volleyball or something,
Yeah.
which I'm like, that's not entertaining to watch. Like,
Right.
so yeah, vlogs
I
are a
know.
whole
It's
other
hard.
thing.
Vlogs are hard because for me, the reason I don't do them a ton is with so much of my life is surrounding my kids right now, and I don't want to put my
Right.
kids like out there on the internet.
Right.
Not to like shame anyone who does that, but
It's just
just
what
for
you don't
me
want to do.
personally, yeah, I just don't want to. So that's something where it's like the majority of my day is spent with them. So what can I vlog like outside of that if I don't want to put them on the internet? Not much. So I don't do them. But anyways,
A question
how often
that
do you review books?
well, before I get to that, I do want to
Mhm.
ask something you said. Actually, I think this could be an interesting conversation, but I just want to touch on it really quick because as you were saying it, I was like, So one thing that I think a lot of people are kind of critical of right now is the trope marketing and how
Yeah.
it'll just be like enemies to lovers, and that's all it'll say. And you're like, what
Yeah.
else is there about that? Do you
Yeah.
feel like, because I love doing book
Mhm.
recommendations videos, like you were saying, where there's an umbrella term that things fall within. Like if
Yeah.
you're looking for this kind of story, if you're looking for
Mhm.
this kind of story, here, these books will fit. But do you feel like that contributes to trope marketing because it reduces a book to a single thing? Or do you feel like within recommendations videos, generally speaking, booktubers still go in depth enough? It might not be a formal review, but do you feel like that we've played a role in that?
Probably.
I think so.
I mean, probably. But the thing about YouTube that I like personally, and this is where I think it kind of this is where the TikTok conversation
I
comes in
was
a little
thinking
bit
that too.
because TikTok being the short form content, that's a lot harder to add a lot more context around the book and around the tropes that you're talking about. Like you can go into more detail and add more context to what you're talking about in YouTube videos and book recommendations on YouTube. So for like my book recommendation videos, I would never just say, yeah, it's got this trope in it. I would like add more around that.
Right.
But I know that on TikTok, it's like the quick short form, like found family, boom, 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 boom. And you don't really
Which
add
is
anything else around it.
I don't I don't completely mind that because
Right.
then it's just like a list.
It's
I
different.
think that where trope marketing frustrates me is when it's used to describe a single book. And I'm like, okay, but but if you're presenting a single book to me, I want to know a little bit more. Whereas with
Right.
lists, it's kind of like an
That's
agreed
true.
upon. I'm looking for that. I'm looking
Yeah.
for things that have this in it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting
Yeah. No, that's a
side.
yeah, it is an interesting conversation because I watched your Immortal Longings trope marketing
Yeah.
video and thought it was a very interesting conversation. It hadn't like crossed my mind to like really think a lot about that. So it was interesting.
That book in particular, I mean, we don't need to get into it, but it has been kind of interesting to see the way that if she just kind of appeared out of nowhere, we didn't have any thoughts about her as an author or her
Yeah.
books ahead of time, and she just kind of appeared on the scene, would it would that book have been better received or found its
Mm,
audience
mm.
more so than where it's at now? But
Yeah.
anyway, so how often do I review books?
Yeah.
So I pretty consistently do the new releases wrap ups.
Yeah.
And I do every now and then there will be a individual book review that'll pop up because sometimes I'm like, I have a lot to say about this. Something that I struggle with is when I do want to do an in-depth review, I know that I'm still going to end up mentioning the books in other videos. So then I never want to be too redundant. So, like at the beginning of the year with the secret projects, I did an in-depth non-spoiler review for Tress, and then we had the spoiler discussion, and I mentioned it in a new releases wrap-up, and I'm like, ugh, I feel like there's already I don't know if I need so much with it all at once. I tried to
Yeah.
wait to put that one in a new releases wrap-up. But since then I've kind of eased back on doing the individual reviews for the secret projects, and I've just had them be in the new releases wrap-ups or
Mm.
and the spoiler reviews. But anyway, um I do a fair amount of recommendations videos. I don't know if I can even say a quarter of my videos are reviews. But another part of this equation, Jesse, how many videos do you put up generally in a month?
Oh, I've reduced it down to like 1 a week. So, yeah,
So a
that adds
quarter
a
is
lot
like
of context.
in a month. Yeah, so I have a tendency on my main channel to have 3 to 4 a week.
Yeah.
So like anywhere from 12 to 16, 17 or 18 depending on like the month cuz sometimes it's like Saturday and Sunday or something.
Yeah.
But I definitely tend to try to have new releases wrap ups go up like at least once a month if not twice a month because I want to review those books when they're fresh. And then if I have a book I've read, then I'm like, oh, I want to talk about this. Then I make a review for it. But I ironically, I guess, am saying that I might review things more than you, but not a
Oh,
higher percentage.
definitely. Yeah, exactly. Because you're just putting out so much more content. And yeah, I mean, the speed in which you read kind of determines how often you can put up videos, reviewing books. Um, so yeah, I think I'm always impressed with how many review videos you are able to put out,
Oh,
with as much as you have going on. So yeah.
so how do you decide what books to review? And this was kind of the initial
Yeah.
question when when our patrons were helping us decide topics. This one surprised the both of us that so many people were curious how we decide
Yeah.
what books we're gonna review.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of like 2 parts to this question because it's probably like, how do I decide what books I have like a standalone review video for versus what books do I just decide to pick up to read for my channel in general? Because those are always going to be reviewed in a wrap up. So I think kind of going back to what I said before, for the standalone review videos, it's really only for books that I have enough to say. So that is a very nebulous criteria, and I don't have a very good way to determine that ahead of time going into a book if
Yeah.
I'm going to have enough to say about it. And one thing I don't do is I don't have standalone reviews for sequels to books, just because it probably would just have such a small audience who would be interested in that, and so
Well, it's
much of it.
especially it's I would say it's almost harder to do a non-spoiler review for a sequel than a spoiler,
Exactly.
even though the spoiler in our mind, it's like, oh, that's even more specific because then people have to
Yeah.
have read it.
Yeah.
But like who's gonna want to see a non-spoiler review? If you're reading the sequel, you're like, I want to see people's thoughts on this more than just like, I thought it was pretty good.
Right.
You want to know, like, what about this scene? What about this?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I would much rather do, like, a full series review at the end of the series, that I've
Right.
read, to do a whole review video for that versus doing, like, each individual book. But I have seen other channels do it where each individual book in the series gets a review, and it's all great. So it totally depends on the channel, but so for me, the standalone video reviews don't come very often, and when they do, it's very hard to predict because I just need to have enough to say. Um,
Yeah.
so I'll let you talk about that part of it, and then we'll come
Okay.
back around to the second part.
Okay.
The second
Um,
part.
I mean, really similarly to you, I love to plan, as you know. Like I have everything figured out for the rest of the year, right? And I videos wise, not like all of life, but um I also because sometimes I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna want to talk about this book, but then sometimes you read it and it ends up being a DNF, or sometimes you pick it up and you're like, I don't
Yeah,
know, it was fine, I guess.
yeah,
And then there are instances where the opposite happens where I figure, oh, I'll read this book and then, talk about it in some wrap up style video or something. And then I end up really being surprised how much I loved it. I'm like, well, now I kind of want to just talk about why I liked this so much and what I
yeah.
thought was great. And then every now and then you get the books that are just, they so didn't work for you that you're like, all right, I gotta talk about this book right now because this was hilarious. And so those can be fun too. But I don't think it's I have a lot of specific questions that will dive deeper into this more vague question here, but I do find that when I've reread a book, like for example, rereading a lot of the Cosmere books, then I don't want to do a new review by myself. I want to have a more in-depth discussion. So if I'm rereading a
Mm,
series, that might contribute to it, and then you can talk spoilers,
yeah,
and you tend to, especially with fantasy, you have a better grasp on the world and you can get a little bit deeper than maybe you would have been able to the first time you read it. And actually, something you pointed out about you don't really want to review sequels, but then you mentioned if you finish a series, I love series reviews because
mhm,
sometimes the first book can be kind of rocky, or sometimes the first book's really good, but then the second one's not doing great. So it's nice I enjoy watching series reviews to get more insight about what you're maybe going to experience when you're going to
yeah,
be like, oh, this has fallen off a little, but
yeah,
is it worth it? And I think that's always really helpful. And sometimes I'll review a first book in a series, and then by the end, I'm like, well, now I got to review the whole series because I need to talk about it again. I need people to
yeah,
understand that it was a great payoff.
yeah,
So
yeah,
for me, what decides is like how much I loved it. And
yeah,
time is another aspect we didn't really, because sometimes I'm like, I want to review this, but I have so much going on and I already
yeah,
have videos ready. I just don't know that I'm going to be able to get to this right now. So
yeah,
that can play a role. But for me, it's not usually I have so much time and I just don't want to do it. It's like, oh, I do want to review this, but I don't know if I can fit it
yeah,
in.
yeah.
So now the specifics that I think make this question a little more interesting. Do you ever avoid reading books, or excuse me, reviewing books because you're afraid of how the fandom will react, whether it's positive or negative? Or have there ever been times where you're like, I don't really want to talk about this because I don't really want to have to deal with the fandom?
I have not. I've not done this yet. I think the closest I came was Wheel of Time because I really didn't like Eye of the World, and that was gonna be like, all right, this is gonna open up a can of worms on the
Do
internet.
you want to read people's dissertations about why
Yeah, I
you
didn't
should
really
still
want to
keep
read.
going?
Yeah, like I didn't like it because it's dense, and then all of the comments are like extra dense. I'm like, this is
The irony.
why. But that I think was the closest. But even then, I reviewed it and was like, whatever. um, no, I don't think so. But I don't blame anyone for avoiding fandoms that could get toxic. Because I mean, if you don't want to have to deal with it, then you don't have to. Like, I don't blame anyone for making that decision.
There's
Um,
also a weird other side to this coin, which is that sometimes you might actually like the book, but you really don't like the fandom. And so then there is the potential of like, I don't really want to be associated with that behavior, because that
right,
can
right,
happen. I don't know that that's really been a thing for me, but
yeah,
there are some instances where fandoms can, I think, I've heard other booktubers say,
yeah.
I don't think I'm going to talk about it because I just don't want to deal with
I
the
don't. Yeah,
reactions.
I like, and I think that for me, there are a couple fantasy series that very much come to mind that I know I won't like, and I
Yeah.
really don't want to do I don't even want to try it because I don't want to put it out there that I don't like it. Because I know I won't
Yeah.
like it. I just know. Malazan. That's basically the one that I'm like, I know it. I know I won't like it, and the fandom is like, some of them are very nice, and some of them are not. So,
Yeah.
like,
I something that I suppose prevented me. There's a couple of factors that will prevent me sometimes from reviewing. I mentioned the redundancy. So last year, I think it was last year, um, I read The Live Ship Traders by Robin Hobb, and I loved the first book so much. And then I was like, second book was a little boring to me, but yeah, that's fine. And then I just hated the end of that trilogy. I hated it so much. But I was already doing a read along with Erin from Booked and Busy. And so we'd been doing in depth discussions on her channel. And I'm like, I don't know. I feel kind of weird doing my own. Like, I don't mind talking about it in videos, but I don't know that I want to do my own dedicated thing just because it feels like, well, that's, that space over there. So I would try to like point people in that direction. So I sometimes, if I'm reading something with other people that they're hosting, I'll still talk about it, but it can feel kind of odd. Not always, though. I'm not saying anybody's stepping on anyone's toes if
yeah.
they do choose to do that. But then the other side of it is sometimes when it's a very personal reason why I didn't care for something. So in live ships, I won't give specifics, but there are some mature content scenes that the way they were handled and the way in which I'm going to describe it as salt being poured into the wound sort of situation where I'm like, it's, you know what, it's too much for me. I don't, and so if I were to give a
Mhm.
lot of in-depths, I'm like, I don't feel like inviting people in to explain to me what she was actually trying to accomplish or
Right.
what the reasoning of why it's actually okay. And so I'm like, yeah, I think that you are all welcome to feel the way you feel. I feel this way, and I don't need either of us to try and impose our feelings onto each
Right.
other because it's like such a personal thing. For one person, it's going to be fine. For another person, they might be in the middle. And in some of the discussions, pretty much everybody didn't like one thing, but it wasn't the same amount of weight when it came to how
Mm.
much it bothered us.
Right.
So and for me, it bothered me a lot. And I'm like, I just don't, I'm kind of done. I like it already
Um,
upsets me. I'm not upset right now, but I sound it. But at the
yeah.
time, I was like, I'm just still so kind of angry because I loved the first one so much. And to have it drop off like that, I was frustrated by it. I'm like, every time I think about it, it gets me all worked up. So I don't want to approach a review in that mindset, I guess.
Mhm.
Because I don't know, as much as possible, even if I'm lukewarm about something or I don't really care for it, I try to be honest about my feelings and have this sense of neutrality when presenting what is not objectively true about a book, but like generally agreed upon, like this is fast paced or this is very political or something like that. I want to be able to deliver that in a way where people can determine for themselves if they're
Yeah.
going to like it. And I just don't always want to be, I don't want to just be angry when I'm talking about it because I'm like, well, someone else, it might not bother them. So
Right.
that can keep me. And I suppose in a way, that's fandom related because the people that are probably going to defend it are the ones that are in the fandom. And I also understand as a viewer when you watch somebody talk about a controversial aspect of a book where sometimes you're like, but it's not, I swear, I promise, it's not quite like you want people watching to understand because we've all seen those reviews where in the comments, whether it's a Goodreads review or a BookTube review, where people are like, "Oh, thanks for saving me the money," and you're like, "But you don't feel the same, you know." But
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think that you have to let people feel how they're gonna feel. Never review Dune.
Oh, I
That's
know that,
another
yeah,
one.
yeah. I haven't read Dune yet, but I've seen negative reviews of Dune on BookTube and the reaction to them, and it's not great.
No.
So yeah, I can see that.
I think that's sad when
It's
it's known for being so negative that you don't even wanna
yeah,
touch it. That's
yeah.
always a bummer.
I'll still read it.
Um,
I'm hoping hopefully I like it. If I don't, then the internet can get mad at me.
do views play a role in how often you review or what you review?
Um,
I think the answer to some
yes.
degree is yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
it does, and I'm trying to think because in some ways, no, in some ways, yes. So, how often I review? No. How often I review is just based on how quick I can read things, which is not very quick right now. But what I review, um, yes, views do play a role.
Sequels, like you mentioned.
Sequels, yeah, but I think this is where it gets really interesting and like no matter what you do, someone's gonna have something. I'll explain. So I know that a lot of booktubers do like the most popular books, right? You
Right.
know that if you review the Wheel of Times, the Robin
ACOTAR.
Hood, the Akatars, you know
Yeah.
you're gonna get a lot of views. But then you also have a certain audience that is so tired of seeing the same books over and over and over and want to see new and fresh books. Like one of my most viewed videos is underrated fantasy books according to my viewers. So it was like books I had never heard of before people made me aware of them. And it's like one of my most viewed videos because I think people just want to see something new. So it's like
Right.
in some ways, if you
It
review
goes
all the
both
popular
ways.
things, yeah, like you're going to attract views. But then sometimes if you review something that's not as popular, but you want to just shout about it and you're like so passionate about it, then that can also get views. So it's
Right.
kind of hard to determine like what's going to get views. You just
Here's what
never
I
know.
Here's what I feel like is the most honest answer I can give. It does not play a role in what I review. It plays a role in how I title the video. Because
I love
if it's an if it's a book like nobody's heard of or obviously some people I'm being hyperbolic, but if it's a book that is not as well known and it's just saying like this book and then book review, if that's the title, it's like nobody's gonna click on it.
right.
but I try to tap into what I feel like because if especially if it's a book that nobody's talking about, I want people, not just for my own sake, for the book. I'm like, this book is really good. I think a lot of you will really like this. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna have something like in the title that's not true about it.
Right.
But like I think for the Art of Prophecy. No, that's the second one that's coming out. No, that's right. The Art of Prophecy. Dang it, I always forget which one's which. Art of
Yeah.
Destiny is the sequel that's coming out. The
Yeah.
Art of Prophecy. When I read it, I was like, it's such a beautiful cover. I feel like the synopsis sounds cool. Surely people are reading this. And then I saw like nobody was picking it up, and I'm like, what? And I think I titled it something like, "This book is going on under the radar and it shouldn't." Something like that.
Yeah.
Because then it cues people like, hey,
Right.
I think a lot of you will like this, as opposed to just
Good
saying,
point.
because I know as a viewer, if I just see something book review, I might be like, I don't know what that is. And then,
Right.
probably be less likely to watch it.
Yeah.
But if I give if I see some kind of indication of like, this is the political fantasy you need to read, I'd be like, well, let me hear about it. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah. No, and
then I have a little
honestly,
bit more
you
info.
you just did this with the Bonesmith, and this is amazing advice for anyone who's watching who's like an aspiring booktuber, is a booktuber right now. This is amazing advice, and I need to go back and redo all my titles. Because your Bonesmith one was like the most fun I've had with a book in so long, or something like that. I was like, well, now I gotta watch it. Jeez, I gotta hear
And it
about
was
so much fun.
like, it's not a lie. After I read it, I was like messaging Shauna, and I was messaging Roger, and I'm like, this book is so fun. It was just a
Yeah,
good time. It was just, I was
yeah,
like, all these books I've been reading this year have been like very like atmospheric or melodramatic
yeah.
or introspective. And this one was just like, do you want to have fun? Let's have fun. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
So it's
love
so
it.
fun.
That's such a good idea. I need to, like, go back, and that's a big reason why I did that for,
Oh,
combat codes. Oh, that's awesome. The combat codes, I had in my thumbnail, like, a new favorite question mark, because I loved that book
yeah.
and was like, "Oh my gosh, I
God
like, wanna
Killer.
talk about it." Yeah, God Killer for you. Um, so I think, and this is another thing I don't think I would do, if there's a book that not a lot of people are talking about, a more unpopular, underrated book, and I don't love it, I probably wouldn't do a standalone review for it, 'cause I
Right.
just feel like it's just, like, kinda kicking something when it's already done,
Yes.
like, when it's already,
I
like,
think,
not very popular.
right.
So I would only do a standalone review for a book that I loved that's, like, underhyped, that I think just
Or
deserves more hype, or a standalone
if
review
it's
for a
super
popular
popular
book,
and you're if
or
it's
yeah,
super popular and you didn't like it, you're like, "It'll be fine.
then
I'm not
right,
hurting anybody's careers or their
right.
chances of success."
Yes,
And now that's
exactly.
not to say because some people go about reviews differently, and I don't want people to ever feel like it's hard because as somebody who, is an aspiring author, I try to go about reviews in a way where I'm like, how much would it hurt my feelings if this was, you know what I mean? Like I try to always present it as like, even if it didn't work for me, here's why it might work for you. But that doesn't mean other people need to be that delicate, because I don't want to police somebody's way of expressing themselves when they're doing reviews. So as a reviewer, I'm like, whatever you feel best represents your thoughts, like that's what you should do. I would
Yeah,
encourage as much as possible that people still try to be diplomatic and polite as much as possible. But I
yeah.
also like a good rant. Like a lot of people,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
fun to watch when
Oh,
someone's
yeah.
like, what the? But I usually find rants funny when we're just laughing about like how dumb the characters are being. Cause
Yeah.
that's still a part of the entertainment factor, is when the characters
Yeah,
are so ridiculous that it's gonna actually be entertaining to some people and they'll like it. It's like
right,
reality TV, you know?
right. Yeah,
Um,
and I think as long as you're not making people feel silly for liking the book, like, if you're doing it in a way that's like, I can understand why other people would like it, but here's where, like, my perspective comes in. So, I think because that's where I can see people getting upset with a review, is
right.
if they're made to feel bad about themselves for liking something because someone's saying
Yes.
that, "Well, you're dumb if you like this book,"
And
or whatever.
I think that reviewers have to be careful about how they word things. But I also think as a viewer, if you really love something, you have to be careful not to put your own insecurities onto a
Mhm.
reviewer. Because if you see
Right.
somebody like ripping apart a book that you love, just them honestly expressing themselves is not an attack on you. So
Exactly.
there are times where people are condescending, and it's like, if you like this, you're what's wrong with society. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, no, I don't, that's not okay. But I do think that if you are just expressing like, here, I thought the writing wasn't very strong, I thought this was a weird
Yeah,
sentence, the character here or the plot thing didn't make sense, and you love that book, they're not saying you're stupid. So
exactly.
as
Exactly.
viewers and reviewers, I
Yes.
think everybody can be as,
Yes.
be nice. So we brought up rants. Do you find rant reviews do better than normal reviews? And this could be a
So
whole topic
oh my
of
gosh.
discussion.
I am probably not the best person to ask for this because I probably did a couple rant reviews in the past, and I'm just not good at them. Like, yeah, I feel like
Because
you
you're
have
like,
to have,
I
like, a
hated.
certain fun fun thing about it. I don't know. I wasn't good at them. To be honest, I just didn't love, like, put putting a ton of, like, negativity out there. I and this is, like, not to shame anyone for putting out rant reviews. I love a good rant review. I love watching them. But for
Some
some
people are
reason
just funny when they're ranting too.
exactly, like, it's, like, fun, entertaining. So, I am not shaming anyone for putting out rant reviews, absolutely not. Please keep them coming because I love them. But for me, I feel, like, kind of awkward about it. I don't know why, and so I don't do a ton. But yes, I mean, negativity is, of course, going to pull in more
You're
people,
not the
and
only one though. The both of us, I feel like, are more likely to gush than we are to rant
yeah,
because when we like something, we're like, "Oh, I can't wait to tell everybody about it. It was so good." And that feeling too of knowing that cuz we've talked about this before as somebody cuz I used to teach and I just love being able to pass on information to someone else that will in some fashion
yeah,
enrich their lives or make them more skilled at something. And it's the best feeling.
yeah,
So when you can just be like, "Hey, this book is really good," and other people find it, that's great. It's such a good
yes,
feeling.
yes,
Um, so I think the both of us tend to be very excited when we're reviewing books.
yes.
However, there is the occasional like, "No, I did not like this book." And if I just hated everything about a book, like literally, I'm like I think the writing is atrocious. I think this is dense. I think this is pretentious. All those things. I tend to still recognize that it will be appealing to someone, but it's the books that are just usually the ones that are just so over the top, nonsensical fun that if it really doesn't click with me, I'm like, okay, I can't. What is this? So those can be, but I'm like, it's
Yeah,
I guess that's a rant. Now, I will say, I think the what can happen is a lot of rant reviews require a person to go through. Depends on the kind of rant. Sometimes the rants are like, this is why this author is a bad person for writing this. And
yeah,
I don't think either of us are really talking about that. We're
no,
more so talking about the like going through various different scenes and talking about the plot and things like that.
yes,
So, as a result, you do kind of take the viewer along for a ride when you're doing rant reviews.
yeah,
And I think what can happen is there's this perception that somebody who is more likely to do rant reviews or does rant reviews often, that person is more analytical or that they read closer than everyone else. And you're like, that's not necessarily it could be true, but it's not always true. I think what can happen on the reviewer side is that you then feel like you can't just read a book and then talk about it casually. So you start to almost look for things to make fun of. And
mm,
you will find that some people, it seems like all they ever do is rant. And it's like I don't want to call it a negative feedback loop in the sense that I'm not saying people are harming each other. I just mean like literally it's about something in a negative fashion because it's a rant.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's like people love it for it being entertaining, but they also love that they feel like this is a more in-depth analysis. And then that person's like, "Oh, I people like this, so I'm gonna
yeah,
do more of this." And a book that they might have normally just been like, "It was all right, like 3.5." They're gonna maybe be a lot harsher than they would normally. And I've even heard some people that will be like, "I gotta find a book to rant about." And they'll seek out books that they think they're gonna hate just so that they can get views. So it depends on the
yes,
person. I don't love that if I'm being honest, because I'm like, I mean, that it because then it feels so much more insincere, I guess.
yeah,
And I don't I don't like insincerity, I guess you could say.
yeah, yeah, and I am, Sarah, the same exact way. If someone is ranting about one of my favorites, I can't watch it, I can't. Hi, Amanda, thanks for joining.
I was
Open
actually
play,
just
that's a good word for
yes.
it.
I was actually just talking to Sean about this concept over dinner last night. the idea of what you're saying of like, oh, I can't watch it if I love it. I do think that sometimes people have this idea that they're more sophisticated and mature if they can hear differing opinions. And you're like, well, sometimes, but really be honest with yourself. Can you hear differing opinions about your favorites? Can you? Because I think what would be healthier is if some people were like, this means a lot to me and I don't really want to hear it. If you have something negative to say, I can't listen to you talk about it. I'm sorry. Because what doesn't make sense to me is people will see somebody do clearly from the thumbnail or the title a negative review about something they love, and they'll click on it and then they'll get mad. And I'm like, what did you think
Yeah,
was going to happen? What did
that's
you think?
that's really silly. Like, to click on something that you know are gonna you're is gonna make you upset. Rants are so different from just critiques. So that's the thing. I think there's a difference between a negative review and a rant review. So I think that that's
Yes.
important because I do negative reviews and I talk about books that I don't like, but I haven't a rant review, I would say, I don't even think my Eye of the World review is a rant review. I don't think I've really done a rant review. So I think there is a difference, and rant reviews about something you love, that's what I avoid. I'm able to understand critiques over books
Yeah.
that I don't like and be like, "Yeah, you're right. I just really like it."
I also think some people can't even hear critiques though. I think some people are like, no, no, don't talk
That's
about.
true.
And I kind of respect when a person knows that about themselves and so they avoid it, or they'll tell you like, I'm sorry you didn't like it. I might not be the best person to talk to about this. I can, because we talk so much about the meaning that books can have on our lives. Then to
Yeah.
have somebody just be like, yeah, but how come in this part? And you're just like,
It's
don't
red.
stop. I don't want you to do this right now.
I know.
Um, I think it's a little different if it's something that's like very hurtful, then I feel like you should be open to hearing that. But if it's just like, I think this one character, like if you're talking about, I use this joke a lot. My brother-in-law will be like, "Oh, Kaladin's mopey again." And I'm like, "Stop it. Don't do that. Don't do that." So I think that's, a little different. Um,
Yes.
but if it's something like, "Well, here's why this is actually," you understand.
Yes.
Fake ranting about a book you actually love, but framing it like, "Oh, Christy, that
That's
would be a lot of fun."
hilarious.
I
That's
almost feel like we
hilarious.
should make that like it would be funny to do a video series where we are in discussion videos, like we're all collectively ranting, but we actually love it and see.
Yeah. That would be
Or it'd be fun if like, let's say Christy, let's say the three of us or something buddy read and one of us hated it and the other two loved it, but we did it where like we pretended we all
oh
loved
my
it to see
god.
who actually didn't like
Who
it.
actually like the
Like,
odd man out videos?
'cause yes, like odd man out. So it'd be like, who seems like it's the hardest to
Who's
say it was really
Yeah,
good?
who's the one who actually hated it? Or
Who's
who's the one
looking
who
down
actually
every
loved it?
time they say like, "Oh yeah, it was great." That
Yeah.
would be so fun. The hard part is that I feel like a lot of times we feel similarly.
Yeah.
Like it's rare for one of us to really hate something and then the other one to really wouldn't it be so fun? We
That
just
would
need
be
to make a
really
chat and like find books
Yes,
we've already read. I
I
feel like if
know.
we buddy read it, then there's a chance like we all loved it, or
Yeah,
but
and
that
I
would
feel
be
like I
tough.
often know well, like, we couldn't do that with past books because I already know how you feel about most of the books you've
That's
read.
true.
So,
Everything's
uh,
in secret and then
yeah,
not.
yeah, that would be
We have
fun.
the hardest time, even though when we're like, "We're gonna save it for the live show," before a live show, it's like,
Oh, it's so
"What
hard
are
not
your
to, like,
general
spoil.
thoughts, though?" Um,
Oh my gosh.
uh, so, another do you avoid, well, okay, are you ever nervous to review certain books because most people think negatively of them? Meaning, you've read a book and it seems like nobody likes it, and then there's a lot of different reasons why you might avoid reviewing a book like
Yeah.
that. But are you ever afraid people are gonna be like, "Oh, they're just dumb because they didn't realize that the book was bad," or they're gonna judge you for what you like?
I have not had that. I think the closest I've had that is honestly, not at the time I was reading it, but since I've read and reviewed it, the Poppy War gets a ton of hate, I've noticed. And a lot of it like critiques that I understand. Like we've talked about the Poppy War, and I understand like some of the critiques about it. But like, there's a lot of people who like hate the Poppy War and are like, "This is your list is totally invalidated because the Poppy War's on it," or something crazy. And I'm like, whoa. So that was like one that since I've read
Surprised
and
you.
reviewed it, I'm like, geez, people really don't like the Poppy War, and I love the Poppy War. So that one I think, but honestly, I'm a little afraid to read Fourth Wing and love it. Like,
Oh,
I
Kristen
love
from Merrily Kristen, she messaged me when she was reading it, and she's like, "I feel the need to inform you that I am enjoying this." Rosaria Munda emailed me to tell me she was liking it, and I was like,
that's
"Okay."
hilarious. And then like Jess Owens is like, I loved it.
I know.
No,
I
no,
know.
that one is like the one that I'm like, well, I'm
Don't be
gonna read
nervous.
it at some point, but I think I'm gonna like
It's
it.
it's just like pure nonsense fun, you
But I
know,
want
like
that
which
kind
I
of
get.
stuff.
I mean, I'm gonna read the next one. I don't usually do that. Usually if I feel like cuz I haven't edited the video yet, but I did a tier ranking of fantasy romance and I put it in like the second to last tier cuz I'm like I don't think that it did anything exceptionally. But I mean, it is I also just think that the phenomenon of that like that book is it's baffling to me. So it's
Oh
also just part
man.
of like the I guess FOMO, like the like what this is so weird to me that this one is the one that has
I just
gotten all the
I
love.
wanna read it so bad, and I'm like, I think I'm gonna
Please
like
do.
it.
I don't know. I mean, I think you're gonna like be entertained,
I
but
think
I
I'm gonna
also
have so
think
much fun.
yeah, I think you will. You gotta message me when you read it.
I will. Eventually. Not for a while, but eventually I will read it.
I think
So
to
funny.
more thoroughly answer this question, I suppose. I have found for a while, I think it's gotten better, but there was a kick for a while on BookTube if you read fantasy and if you happen to read both YA and adults, that when
Mhm.
you talked about YA, you were kind
Oh,
of you must just be dumb because you like YA books or why don't you read books for adults? And I think we're all pretty past that at this point, excuse me, but I don't want to speak for anybody else and say they didn't have to deal with this, but I do feel like it was especially prominent if you are a lady and you're reading YA
yeah.
that you get looked at a certain way. Whereas, and I've even seen people say before about Sanderson's YA books, for example, if the author themselves is a man, where people will be like, "Oh, well, YA is dumb," and then they'll be like, "Oh, except for the ones by like Sanderson and Abercrombie," and you're like, "Okay, you
Right.
don't notice what's going on here, really? All right. I mean, if you just like those ones, but Sanderson's YA books are pretty YA, I gotta say. Um,
Yeah.
but also just the fact that plenty of people can still talk about Aragon and nobody bats an eye, but if you talk about something else that's YA, which there's a lot of. And again, I don't feel like this is as much an issue anymore, which is good. But it's not that it made me not want to talk about them. I do think it made me kind of bitter toward certain sections of booktube though, because it's like if you don't like YA, that's completely fine, but it ties back to what we were saying earlier. Why are you making people feel bad about it? It's like, does this book with dragons and magic, is it geared toward teenagers or is it geared toward people just a little bit older than teens, you know, like, okay, so you're so much better because the target audience is a little older. I remember telling my uncle about that, and he's not really like a reader. So I was like, "Oh, YA books." He's like, "What does YA stand for?" And I was like, "Young adult." And he's like, "Aren't you guys young adults?" He was so confused about that
Yeah.
concept. Um,
Yeah.
so I do think though there are certain books like we mentioned Fourth Wing, but other ones too that in adult fantasy circles I think have a certain perception, like the Dresden Files or
Oh.
Black Prism is one that I think a lot of people feel a certain way. So if they see somebody
Yeah. Oh, that's a good
like
point. I didn't
it,
even think of that one. Jeez, yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, I could say Black Prism because I love Black Prism, but I know a lot of people have very serious issue with Black Prism, and, like, that's another thing where it's like, I get it. I get all the critiques that Black Prism has, and when I read it, I wasn't aware of any of that, so I just kind of went in and didn't have those issues with it. But I don't blame anyone who does have issues with it. But yeah, I mean, that is one that I'm like kind of nervous to talk about because I don't want to like upset anyone who did feel some way about it,
Right.
even though I didn't. So yeah, that's a really good example.
Christy's comment here, God forbid you wear makeup too while reviewing books. I mean, that used to be a bigger frustration for me. I don't know if I ever told you that I had they had someone email me to tell me I was catfishing because I wear makeup, and I'm just like, okay.
Do you know
I
what
mean,
catfishing is?
yeah, I know what catfishing is.
Me.
Yeah.
No, to the person who
The
emailed
person.
you. I'm like,
yeah, I know. I'm
you're
like, you're kind of comparing me to a predator, but all right. Like, but
so strange.
yeah, I used to get comments, a decent or comments that'd be like, "You're gonna age poorly because you wear makeup," or something where I'm just like, "What does that have to do?" This
Oh my
just speaks to
God.
your inability to listen. If you just so can't focus on the book that you know what I'm saying?
Yes. I don't know why you get these comments. I've not received any of those types of
I
comments, and
think
I'm
this
like,
was much worse when I first started. I think because
maybe.
BookTube has become such a big thing and there's so much
Yeah,
more there's a lot of diversity on BookTube
yeah,
and people that do really cool things with how they dress or they wear like kind of funky clothes or interesting makeup or they have cool haircuts or they're really kind of like suit and tie like proper,
yeah,
looking whatever. But I just think I'm like, how restrictive? And also, why do you bother to read? A big thing that's great about reading is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and appreciate the different
yeah.
kinds of experiences and people that exist in the world. And then you're like, but you should be a certain way when you talk about books. I just think that's
So
silly.
silly. It's
Back to the question though. I do think sometimes there are certain books that I feel like if I'm saying I like it, that certain people might have a view of it, but it doesn't really keep me from talking about the book and
yeah,
being honest about my feelings. I think that's the best way I can. There's some books where I'm like, I feel like people are gonna kind of think I'm dumb if I say like, or some people are gonna be like, I can't believe you would like that, and it's like, well, I'd rather be honest with you, and then
yeah,
if it bothers you, then I guess I would rather somebody if they see something they don't like, then I don't want them wasting their time watching my channel when they could be
that's
watching
the
someone
thing.
else's.
That's the thing. I
I
think that's why you wanna be as honest as you can be on your channel because you wanna attract the people who like you for what you're saying, the types of books you talk about, you as a like, you don't wanna attract people who are attracted to things that aren't genuine about yourself.
right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a great point that it's like if you don't like that I like these types of books, maybe I'm just not the booktuber for you, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, very well put. Because people only have so much time,
Yeah, like,
and
there's so many booktubers. It's
yeah,
okay if I'm not
yeah.
the one for you.
Or if you genuinely are like, I really don't know how they can like any of those books, and it makes it so that I can never tell if I'm gonna like the things that they like because it seems like we don't click. Even if you like the person, and that's another thing too. I mean, some people actually will keep watching the person because they like the person, even if they don't like any of the books they talk about,
Yeah, exactly,
and
yeah,
that's kind of fun too. But I just want people to because nobody owes us anything, so I don't
right.
want them to feel like they need to
Yeah,
watch if they don't want to.
exactly.
There's
Yeah,
probably a viewer out there that is so happy that you like an unpopular book. Yeah.
yeah, it's like as many people as you make upset with an opinion, you also make another person
Right.
happy with an opinion, so,
I
yeah.
have seen before this idea that because okay, I guess this is a oh, let me read what you have here. I don't get watching a video you don't like just to comment negatively. Go find
Right,
something else you want to watch.
right?
So, I think that's what most people are like. It's
Yeah.
just that means that the ones that do comment weird stuff, like they're the ones that have the audacity, but I don't feel like the majority.
Right.
Um, Yeah, I agree. Wouldn't that be no fun to watch stuff you don't like? Agreed. I even if I've seen something that I like profoundly disagree with, or I'm just like, wow, this person's a complete whatever. I'm like, ugh, and then I
Click
stop.
off and just go
I
about
have
your day.
never left like here's why. And I'm more tempted to do that on Instagram than on YouTube because it's more like short form.
Yes.
So it's more to just like I told you about that video with the orcas, and then there was the comment that was like, stupid PETA trying to control the way we talk. They're called killer whales. What's with this woke like what? And I'm like, what? I wanted to tell them like, look up another name for a killer whale. It's not like it was invented by this post. Anyway, stuff like that where I'm like tempted to be like, hey, you shouldn't be on the internet. You shouldn't be allowed. No, I don't really think that needs to be clear. So stuff like that. But even then, I haven't said anything because it's
whatever.
It's not helpful to anyone. There was another point I started to make before I the unpopular books and people that you feel the way you feel. I think sometimes something that can happen is there's like an identity that can be created, that there are certain books where it's expected that you like them, or there are certain books where it's expected that you won't. And I have seen sometimes where people feel like they have to be a little bit more favorable towards certain things because they know their audience loves it. And then the opposite, they know their audience thinks this one book is so terrible. So what I'm saying is they essentially never actually have an unpopular opinion because all their opinions fit their audience.
Right.
But it can seem like it's unpopular if you aren't necessarily somebody who typically watches or is subscribed to then see it and you're like, oh, this person didn't like this. But I have seen sometimes like unpopular opinions videos where I'm like, literally everybody in your comments agrees with you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how unpopular that was.
Yeah. I think, if you're ever like watching like my top fantasy list or whatever, and it's like all the series that you would
all time
find, like looking up top fantasy series of all time, you should be like, really? You just happen to
the most popular
all of the most popular
which
series
I guess like of course being fair,
maybe
that's what they like, and that's and or because when they got into it they kind of gravitated toward what are the things everybody says are great, and then they've read that and so that's what they like. That makes sense too. But there have been instances where you kind of are like, and I'm not saying it's even an intentional thing, it's just like,
but also
somebody else said this is great.
So for me, I'm like, that's a turn off of a channel because I'm like you're not gonna give me anything new. I want to like discover something new, or
You mean
see something.
they like Malazan and Loch Lamora and Cosmere and
and Game of Thrones and Wheel of Time,
Abercrombie, Wheel of Time,
Elderlings,
yeah,
all of them. Nothing new, really. So I'm like, maybe this isn't the one for me.
It is a certain kind of fantasy, and I don't always I don't see that and go like, oh, snooze. I don't believe this person is genuine, or I'm not saying that. It's just what I'm getting to is the fact that sometimes the influence can go in reverse, where the outside of like, this is what, kind of back to the prompt of are you afraid of people thinking negatively of you? It's sort of like, are you gravitating towards certain books because of the positive reception that you will receive in liking them, not even just reviewing them or discussing them, but liking them? And I will say, I think a lot of people fall into this where if enough people have said and taken seriously a praiseworthy book, if something's constantly winning awards or if it's on those top lists, you kind of go into it thinking, well, this must be good. And then sometimes people can fall into the idea of maybe it's me and I'm just not getting it. And then they will go really out of their way to kind of try to figure out what makes it brilliant, as opposed to what they would do typically for something less popular, where they're just like, I didn't really like this and here's why.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Don't bring
Christy, you're
Malfoy
so
into this.
funny.
Hey, I
I'm sorry,
mentioned
I'll leave
Cosmere also.
leave Robin Hood out of it. So
No, bring
funny.
her in. Just kidding. Um, uh, so I think this is a tough question a lot of people have to ask themselves. Are you ever afraid of reviewing books because you don't want to negatively impact the author's career? We touched on this earlier, but just to formally recognize this point, yes, for me.
Yes. Yes. Self-published books. Yes. Yes.
And
Absolutely. Yes.
maybe like books that are not well known at all. Like if a book has, like a few hundred
Yeah.
ratings and I also am like, like I don't, it just feels unnecessary. It feels like, I think you were saying earlier, like there's like this dogpiling effect where it's like, I don't know that I really need to add to
Yeah.
this.
And honestly, a big reason why I've stopped accepting books for review on my channel is because of this, because
Yeah.
a lot of the books I was receiving, some of them are quite good, and some of them I didn't love. And I knew those authors were watching me, and it was a very uncomfortable situation to be in. Having to talk, because I'm not gonna lie, so having to talk not super negative, that's why, like, I was trying to be very balanced and say what didn't work for me, and again, why you would never do, like, a rant review for that kind of book, but that's a big reason why I've stopped accepting books
Yeah.
for review. It's very uncomfortable, and reviewing books that authors are in reviewer spaces watching, that's also something I'm very afraid of, is having an author see a video where I'm reviewing their book negatively. So, yes, absolutely afraid of this.
Yeah. I think a lot of what you said is true for me as well. I think that there are some people, and like I respect that they will treat every book exactly the same. And if they really didn't like something, they'll do that dedicated rant or they'll do the dedicated negative review, even if they're the first person to make a dedicated video about that book. They'll put that out there. But I mean, this is part your point about authors and reviewer spaces and feeling uncomfortable with, this is why you don't accept books for review anymore. So I never once sent a book to anyone for my book because I didn't want anybody ever to feel like I'm looking over their shoulder. I want to see what they have to say. I just don't. I am a pretty firm believer in respecting reviewer spaces and authors. And I know how tough it is to be that person who I can only imagine a lot of authors with their debut and like they want to know like what do people think? Do people like this? Because how sad to pour so many hours and years into something and you're really passionate about it. I think sometimes people have this idea that authors are just trying to make money and so you're like, no, a person spent so much time on that. And for whatever reason, maybe it's not doing well, but they put it out there and then they're supposed to like never know what came of it. That's tough. It's like kind of it's really devastating when you put yourself in that author's shoes. So if there's a lot of like if Fourth Wing to go back to that example, if like everybody was unaware of that book's existence and if nobody was talking about it, the few people that read it, didn't really like it, I probably would not have put up the review that I did. But part of that review was like the fascination of like, what the heck is happening with this book?
Yes.
Which sort of is a nice full circle because at the beginning of the video we were talking about like what other things do we talk about besides just book reviews on our channel. And so sometimes it's like the culture around something and the hype train and things like that. Leanna did a video where she bashed on her favorite books. Yeah, I did a video I think I've done videos where I talk about like my least favorite things about my favorite books. But I know years ago I did a video recommending books I don't like. Like the whole thing was a list of books I don't really like. Because it is kind of difficult to put yourself in that like, okay, how would I recommend this there's only a couple times I won't. So actually, this is another question of like, what would determine whether you review something. If I find a book to be blatantly inspired by something else, I will maybe mention like once in a wrap up or something, like this is why this didn't work for me. And then I probably will never talk about that book again because I don't want to give it any attention. I don't want to recommend it. And I also, I don't blame authors necessarily. I blame the publisher for making them think that it was okay to put that out.
I just had this experience. So yes, I understand.
Oh, I don't know if I know what this is.
It's a thriller book, so I don't know if you would be aware of it. Not a fantasy. But yes.
Did you just read it or was it a while ago? Because I remember in one of your vlogs where you were talking about this. It was when your shelves were being finished up.
I think, yeah.
You were like, this plot's like exactly the same.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like say anything, but like it's really similar.
And I remember the one time I was pretty like, this is too similar for me. I had people that were like, it's called plagiarism. And I'm like, I know the word. I am avoiding the word intentionally because I don't want to put that on an author again, because it can be and maybe the author did fully know, like, this is maybe crossing a line. I don't think they did. I think they wrote something inspired by something, and the publisher made it seem as though it was completely fine to do so. And it can be a blurry line because you see retellings all the time. So it's hard to know, like, what is acceptable to be inspiration and what's not. And also, just because I found it to be too close doesn't mean everyone's going to. I just don't feel comfortable talking about it anymore. That sort of situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
So wrapping it up, I have one final question. Overall question: is BookTube about books or about the image of being a certain kind of bookworm?
Oh, what a question. No, I do think BookTube's about books. I think that there are certain channels that lean into more about being a reader. And I love watching those types of videos of just following someone along in their day as they include reading in that day. So I don't think it always has to be about books, but I think at the end of the day, BookTube is BookTube because it's about books, and that is probably what is going to connect every booktuber you see, is that they talk about books. I don't necessarily think everyone does reviews of books as much or as much as some others, but I don't think that there has to be a certain number of reviews you do to be considered a booktuber. I just don't. So you can review one book a year and still be a booktuber. So no, I do think it's about books, and I think it's about just loving the hobby of reading.
I think I think a lot of us end up having certain niches. I think a lot of us are a certain kind of bookworm, and the circles we're in were fantasy bookworms. And then there's all the things that go along with that, of the other types of hobbies a lot of us tend to have, or the way in which we got into reading, the way our imaginations work, the whimsy of it all. There is that part of it which you could say is about being a certain kind of bookworm. But I think the wording of this prompt of like the image of it, is it about the image? I don't think most people come to BookTube thinking, I want to convince everybody. Like, no, most people don't come to BookTube being like a pick-me girl. You know what I mean? Where they're like, see how interesting and different I am because of the fact that I like books. That's not why most people are doing it. They're doing it because they like books and they want to talk about books. And then it can turn into, like I said when I started my answer, it can turn into a niche. You can find an aspect you like sharing, and that can be kind of your thing. So there are people that are very much embracing the like romanticize your life and get a cozy mug and blanket and book and light a candle, and like that can be fun. I like having an ambiance on my TV, and that's basically an ambiance. So I think some people create from an artistic standpoint, and maybe that's less about the book, but that's okay too. I think the main takeaway is that it's not like people are purposefully using books to make themselves look a certain way. I think
Right.
most people just really genuinely love books. It's
Yeah.
a rare person that's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make a channel that is likely never going to amount to much
Talking
because
about
I
books that
really
I
want
don't
people
like.
to think this thing of me.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you got into the wrong
Yeah.
area then. I don't know what to tell you. Um, yeah, so maybe it's not always about books necessarily, but like the hype of, preparation for something, which is still a book, but it's not a book review. Anyway, I don't probably need to continue. I think your answer was capturing it all. Do you have
Yeah.
any final thoughts about this? I know this
No.
conversation was a little kind of abstract, so it sort of went into a lot of different areas,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe abstract isn't the right word. Vague. It was a vague topic.
Yes, a big prompt, so we had to go in a couple different directions with it. I like it. I like it a lot. No, it was fun. Thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate you
Yeah,
being here.
it was super fun. Thanks everybody who joined. And I'll this is gonna go up on my channel, so I'll have Jesse's channel linked. You can find our other videos. I've had one on my channel, and I think you've had two,
2,
three.
yeah.
How many have we done of these? I don't know.
This is episode 4, I think. So I've had 2 on my channel so far. Mhm.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter. We've done a few at this point.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's been a good old time. And if there's any other topics you'd like us to chat about, let us know. We
Yeah.
might not get the chance to chat for a bit because holidays are coming up and
Yeah.
things like that, but I imagine we'll at the very least resume come
Yes.
2024
Oh my gosh. So crazy.
because it's
Can't
already
believe it.
it's October,
I can't
basically.
believe it. I
And
can't.
then it's going to be Halloween, and then it's going to be Thanksgiving, and then it's going to be Christmas, and then it's New Year's, and then it's 2024.
So good. No.
This has been my mindset since October, or excuse me, since August, because August it goes Sean's birthday, Jashana's birthday, my mom's birthday. And then in September, it's like our anniversary. Fall's here. And then October is Halloween and the weather's better. I can go outside again. And then November is, Thanksgiving. And then what I was saying before. And then I'm like, oh my gosh. So as soon as August hits, I'm like, the year's almost over.
It's so crazy. It's so
Yeah.
wild. Oh
Yeah.
gosh. Well, we'll talk soon then about more
Yeah.
plans. Book too.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.